Okay, so failure. I don't know about you, but it's not exactly a word I'm rushing to put on my vision board.
Right.
But what if, and stick with me here, what if we could actually use those moments, when things don't exactly go according to plan, to our advantage? And I mean, really use them. That's what we're digging into today. We're talking about turning those setbacks into, well, not just stepping stones, but maybe even launch pads.
Yeah, there's that saying, right? Failure is not the opposite of success. It's part of the journey or something like that.
Exactly. And we've got some really juicy material to work with today. There's this draft podcast episode all about, you guessed it, learning from failure. And they dive into some really interesting stories about entrepreneurs who did just that. But, and this is key, we're going deeper than just the highlight reel here.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking the nitty-gritty details, the almost didn't make it's, because that's where the good stuff is hidden.
It's so easy to look back and see, like, the success story and think, oh, it was a straight shot to the top.
Right.
But, I mean, time and time again, it's those setbacks, those detours that make the journey what it is.
Speaking of detours, can we talk about Steve Jobs for a second? Getting fired from the company you founded? I mean, talk about a plot twist.
Oh, yeah.
Even if we're not tech CEOs, that hits home a little, right?
Yeah. And you have to remember, this is 1985 we're talking about, Apple. Totally different world. This wasn't just, oh, the business failed. This was Jobs' baby. Imagine pouring your heart and soul into something and having it basically say, yeah, we don't need you anymore. Tough break.
More than tough, right? It makes you wonder, how do you even begin to pick yourself up from something like that?
And that's what's so fascinating about Jobs, right? He didn't just bounce back. He reinvented himself. The draft episode mentions that whole NXT thing, which, okay, not quite Apple-level success at the time.
Right.
But it gave him a space to kind of, I don't know, refine his vision, experiment without the pressure cooker of what Apple had become.
So it's like, in a way, getting fired was hitting the reset button.
Exactly. And that's what we miss when we just focus on the failure part. Sometimes those setbacks, they're actually like opportunities in disguise. You get to reevaluate, try something you might never have considered otherwise.
Okay, let's switch gears for a second. From Silicon Valley to something, well, let's just say everyone wears underwear, right?
Right.
The draft we're looking at talks about Sara Blakely, the Spanx lady.
Oh, yes, Spanx.
So I'll admit, at first, I was all about the Spanx. But then I learned she spent 7 years selling fax machines door to door before that. 7 years.
Yeah.
That's dedication.
That's something else.
But there's something there, right? We're so fixated on the aha moment, the big break. But Blakely's story, it's like a reminder that sometimes success is years of just plain old hustle, finding a need and figuring out how to meet it. In her case, comfy shapewear that actually works.
Right. But think about it. What's she doing all those years selling fax machines? She's interacting with people, figuring out their pain points, probably experiencing a few of her own along the way.
And boom, Spanx is born.
Exactly. It wasn't just a product. It was a solution, born out of years of seeing a problem and thinking, there has to be a better way.
Which makes you wonder, what everyday problems do we encounter that could spark a brilliant idea? I mean, have you ever come across something and thought, there has to be a better way to do this?
Oh, all the time.
Right.
I think that's a question we should all be asking ourselves more often. The trick isn't just noticing the problem, it's being open to those less obvious solutions.
Like turning a personal annoyance into, well, a billion-dollar company. Now that's what I'm talking about, turning lemons into lemonade. Or, should I say, shapewear. But, okay, let's flip the script for a second. What about those times when, even when you're doing everything right, success still feels just out of reach? Let's talk about Elon Musk for a minute. I mean, this is the guy who just seems to, like, defy gravity, you know?
Right.
But even Elon Musk, had a moment where it all almost went, well, poof. Our source material points out, this time back in 2008, both Tesla and SpaceX, I mean, they were on the brink.
Yeah.
It really puts things in perspective, like even the big dogs, they have those moments.
It's easy to forget that people like Elon Musk, they're not invincible. They face real challenges, real setbacks. Back in 2008, both of those companies, Tesla and SpaceX, they were dealing with some pretty major crises. Tesla had these production delays, and then there were the financial constraints. It wasn't pretty.
Oh, I bet.
And SpaceX, they had a string of failed rocket launches. Not exactly what you want when you're trying to revolutionize space travel.
No kidding. So what did he do? How do you even come back from that kind of pressure?
Well, Musk had poured a ton of his own money into these companies, so the stakes were incredibly high. But I think that's where you see that real resilience, that adaptability.
The draft calls it persistence.
Right. persistence. But it's more than just willpower. It's this almost unshakable belief in your vision, even when the odds are totally stacked against you.
Okay, so how do you pull it off? Was it just pure stubbornness, or is there something more going on?
It was a combination of things, really. I mean, yeah, that unwavering belief was a huge part of it. But he was also willing to adjust, to make changes when they needed to be made.
So it wasn't just about pushing ahead no matter what.
No, not at all. He knew he had to address the issues at Tesla, the production problems, and those technical glitches that were plaguing SpaceX. He made tough calls, shook things up a bit.
Sounds like a bit of a roller coaster ride.
It definitely was. I mean, he restructured teams, put even more of his own skin in the game to secure funding. It was risky, but it paid off.
So being willing to adapt, to change course when it's necessary.
Exactly. It's about seeing those setbacks not just as failures, but as data points. They can tell you a lot about what's not working, what needs to change, whether it's a product, a strategy, or even the whole darn vision.
So you need that unwavering belief, but you also need the flexibility to adapt when the situation calls for it.
100%. And, that ability to adapt, it doesn't just happen overnight. It means facing up to some uncomfortable truths sometimes, admitting when you're wrong, and being willing to make those big changes.
It makes you think about those three key lessons the draft talked about: adaptability, rejection, persistence. We've seen all of them in these stories, just in different ways.
It's like they're all connected, not just separate things, but different parts of the same puzzle. Like Jobs' adaptability, it really shone through after he got the boot from Apple.
It forced him to start over, right, to reevaluate and find a new way forward.
Exactly, and that led him to Pixar and then eventually back to Apple. It's a wild ride.
And Musk, with all that persistence, that almost superhuman drive, he needed that willingness to adapt to make it work. Those early setbacks with Tesla and SpaceX, they could have sunk him if he hadn't been willing to learn from them.
Exactly. And what about Sara Blakely, right? 7 years of selling fax machines. Talk about persistence.
It really makes you stop and think, which of these qualities do we already have and which ones do we maybe need to work on a little?
It's a good question to ask yourself, Because let's be real, those entrepreneurial journeys, they're rarely a straight shot to the top. There are going to be bumps in the road.
Moments where it feels like failure is right around the corner.
It's part of the process.
Which brings us to something interesting. Our source material, it kind of presents these entrepreneurial journeys as these big successes. But is there a danger in always putting failure on a pedestal?
Oh, that's a good question.
Is it always a stepping stone? Or are there times when knowing when to quit, to walk away, is just as important? It's like we're supposed to throw a party every time we stumble,
Right.
Wear those failed startups like some kind of badge of honor. But I wonder, are we missing something there? Like, what about the toll it takes? All those learning experiences.
Yeah, it's a good point. We're so quick to jump on that fail fast, fail often bandwagon. But we forget that not all failures are created equal. Some, they're lessons learned. You dust yourself off, come back stronger.
Right.
But others, they might be telling you something's fundamentally flawed. Maybe it's the idea, maybe it's the execution, maybe the market just isn't there. And sometimes knowing when to walk away, that's just as important as all that grit and determination.
So how do you tell the difference, right, between a good failure and one that's like, okay, time to cut bait?
It's tricky. There's no magic formula, but I think a big part of it is being honest with yourself, like really honest. Take a step back from all the emotion and ask those tough questions. What really went wrong here? Was it just a misstep, or was there a bigger issue? Am I holding on because I've invested so much, or do I truly believe in this?
Easier said than done, right? Our egos can get in the way sometimes.
Yeah.
Like with Elon Musk. He went all in on Tesla and SpaceX, but even he had to make some course corrections.
Exactly.
But how do we know when it's time to pivot versus when to just walk away?
That's where having people you trust comes in. Mentors, advisors, even potential customers. Get their honest feedback. It's easy to get so laser focused on your own vision, you miss things. So having those outside perspectives, even if they're not what you want to hear, it's crucial.
It's funny you mention not what you want to hear. Because there seems to be this theme running through all these stories, this idea that growth comes from those uncomfortable places.
It's so true.
Jobs gets ousted from Apple, has to confront all those shortcomings. Blakely spends years hustling before Spanx takes off.
It's like that saying, get comfortable being uncomfortable. It sounds kind of crazy, but I think it's one of the most important skills anyone can learn. Those moments when you're unsure, when you're facing those fears and doubts head on, that's where the magic happens.
So as we wrap up our little deep dive here, I think the takeaway isn't just about embracing failure, but about really examining it.
Absolutely.
It's not just, what did I learn?
Yeah,
But also, is this still the right path? Do I need to change direction?
you got it. It's about finding that sweet spot between pushing forward and knowing when to course correct, when to say, you know what, this isn't working.
And defining success on your own terms. What does that even mean, right? It's not always about the big wins, the billion-dollar exits. So, listeners, here's something to think about. What does success look like to you? And how will you handle those inevitable bumps in the road? Keep those questions in mind because your journey, it's just getting started. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep diving deep.